The first step with anything is to take a look at what's already in play, what's doing well, and what might need, either improvement, or what's already great and needs more play. So that kind of identification of themes is probably your first stop, and AI can help you a lot with something like that. See, one of the things I must say though is that don't only start and stop with, hey, here are my, in our case, 221 episodes over the last 5 years, and these are our top episodes in terms of listens or downloads, subscribers, that sort of thing. And then say that we will cater all of our thinking to that specific set of messaging. The thing with the podcasting medium is that while you are going to live in perpetuity in a podcast hosting platform, where people can find you, and those episodes are going to live literally forever as long as you keep them alive. The actual findability of the podcast and podcast content comes from other things, comes from how much you post on social. It comes from how you're writing a newsletter or a blog or all of the above, out of the content that you're using your podcast for. And so that's how more and more people are finding going into your podcast potentially for a deeper listen. Or like I've often said, most people never actually listen to your podcast. They've gotten all of this material somewhere else in sort of snippet form, and that was the need of the moment. So we took a look at a lot of those themes, and while it's not like our numbers are massive and we needed big data processing, the availability of that quality of processing for a much smaller data set, where we're able to put in a few factors and have AI analyze for us, so based on this and this, what are the top three themes, and where is the crossover with the ideal client profile, and where should we take our messaging in terms of not doing too much all at once. And so those are complex questions that you needed top level of consultants for, and we ourselves as the subject matter experts would rarely find the time to do this kind of thing for ourselves, leave alone document it, right? And so I think that concept of understanding that AI's biggest strength is patterning. That's why it's called machine learning. It learns the pattern from the way in which you repeat things, and so use it for that. The second, I've already gone through the decision to rebrand extensively with you in terms of what the decision involved, and AI was involved in a couple of places in this decision. The first of them was to actually assess, while we were also soliciting information from our clients, from past clients, from people who we know are listeners of the podcast, from people who I met during my speaking and training engagements, who mentioned the podcast. I made it a habit to sort of ask about what their thoughts were in terms of a name. And so I gathered that information together, and then putting that kind of stuff into AI and asking it to go back and forth with you to create a rubric. I need to make this decision. Tell me what factors I need to take into account in order to make a decision like this. And so I find it quite invaluable, even in the process of deciding how to decide using AI. And this is what I mean often when I'm on calls with people or in speaking gigs. I will mention over and over again that the first place to start is to use AI as your second brain. And too often people think that means you get AI to write for you, and every single word you're writing, whether it's your blogs or your emails or whatever, is now suddenly automated, and you have no idea who these AI agents are who are speaking on your behalf. And I'm here to tell you that it's nowhere near as quote unquote dark / sexy as that. It's much more directed by humans to be able to get to a place of much greater mastery right now. And so the second place where I used AI was indeed in helping form those frameworks for the decisions at hand. Then the next part was brainstorming the actual name. Given those three things that I wanted to hit, it became, like I said, a little bit easier to go into a tool like ChatGPT and be like, I want this, and this to happen. And so, help me come up with some names. Now, I will tell you, preface this by saying that general AI, ChatGPT and Claude are not very creative at things like this. So they will give you options, which will help you come up with some directions. It will help you, rule out stuff that perhaps you don't want. But don't expect the whole process to happen with just that. I also looked up some custom GPTs, both from people that I know and general ones that are out there. And for those who don't know what a custom GPT is, think of custom GPTs as like apps that are designed by someone with a specific process to do a specific thing. I mentioned at the top of the episode that there's myshowrunner.com, which I created with Dan Sanchez, to put together like a clear interview process for like a guest podcast interview. So those are custom GPTs, and think of the custom GPT store from OpenAI like an app store. So you can go in there and find an app to help you do something. And so that's kind of what it is. So I found a few of those and I looked into those because someone's already programmed this with their naming. And so it's worth taking a look at tools like that. And then, after I had done all of that, as well as like from people, you have a lot of ideas, right? Especially if you ask people to choose one of two things, you'll often find that people will give you, hey, have you thought about this? Or have you thought about this? And that's great, as long as you're clear what you're trying to do and whether or not those suggestions work for you. So that brainstorming of the actual name, there was AI really supercharged that process. Now, next came a heavily human driven process, which was getting feedback. This involved simply me reaching out to people, me sending texts, emails, voice notes, no videos, not a biggest fan of recording videos to people. But yeah, a number of those other ones to folks exactly in the audience that I mentioned, clients, past clients, listeners, and people in my social network who make themselves known regularly through posts. And so that was manual. Lots of information was gained. Do not discount things like polls. This is literally what polls are created for. I know people create polls regularly because platforms like LinkedIn and Instagram like tools which give you interaction. And so they prioritize things like polls, even if it's like, do you prefer to eat like bread for breakfast? Yes or no? Sure, do those, no shade. However, polls are created literally for things like this to help you understand where people stand on bigger decisions. And so I did a number of polls, not just one, but like a few, to understand what the audience themselves on social thought, and then deeper in interviews with some other folks. Next came a pretty key thing, which I think a lot of people forget because you get carried away by the idea of naming something. Creative vibes are flying, it's all fun, but you do want to make sure that what you have is available. And as someone who's on the naming end of this, I'm not a lawyer, I certainly don't understand the process, but I can tell you that as a user, it's not easy to find out whether or not something is in use. And you really want to take a moment to do that. For sure, AI tools can help you here. And I'm not talking about things like ChatGPT and Claude, which are not brilliant at searches that are current. Instead, you want to use a tool like perplexity.ai. I've spoken about it a lot on this podcast. Perplexity is a search tool which does a search and summarizes information for you based on what's out there. And that's an excellent place to go in terms of looking for information like this. Bear in mind, you also want to go old school and just enter it into Google and see what comes up as like paid searches. Who's paying for certain things? Like, does someone already have a program? It may not be in your domain, but it's helpful, especially with generic words like the ones that we were seeking. It's helpful to make sure that nobody else owns it. And I'll tell you a little bit more in the challenges section in a second, but definitely make sure that you're checking to make sure your name is available. And lastly, there's a finalization process. It involves some reflection, some clarity of thinking, some space, some room to let go. In my case, even a little bit of grief. And so all of that went into the process of making it final. That's our whole entire process of how I used AI to go through these things. This kind of branding work would have cost tens and tens of thousands of dollars, if not hundreds of thousands of dollars, in the past, with this level of rigor and with this level of hard work. So the fact that it's possible, it's still work, But the fact that it's possible, accessible, has been democratized for more and more brands. Maybe not everyone can do it because their subject matter expertise is not marketing. But each of us has the ability to explore this tool to see where it can take our body of expertise.